So, moving on to our next segment, I will hand the floor, as it were, over to you to share with us three maritime archaeological updates. So these are smaller stories that we sort of lump together because of their theme, but they're all sort of connected to things that we've covered in previous watching briefs, aren't they?
That's right. I mean, in the past month, there have been three really significant developments in maritime archaeology and treasure hunting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There's the outlier, the one I'll take in isolation is the Goodwin Sands. We've covered the Goodwin Sands at length on Watching Brief over the last year, 18 months. And to cut to the chase, the Port of Dover had applied to remove as much as 3 million tons of sand and gravel from the Goodwin Sands for what's called the Dover Western Docks Revival Project.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big project to to reclaim land from the on Dover Western Docks and put it to profitable use for the harbour. Yeah. This has been opposed by a very effective local group called Save Our Sands. It has also been opposed by many independent archaeologists and archaeological and natural environment groups. But last Thursday, the Marine Management Organisation, which is the government body which controls access to the seabed within British territorial waters, mm-hmm. granted the Port of Dover a licence. That means that they now have permission to remove that material, and they say they're going to do it starting next autumn. That's autumn 2019.
Right.
As it stands at the moment, Goodwin Sands SOS are taking legal advice about whether the decision can be challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of grounds that certainly some observers believe the decision can be challenged on, one of which is an unminuted meeting that took place between the head of licensing at the Marine Management Organisation and the then head of the then chief executive of the Port of Dover last year, while the consultation and consideration of the licence was still going ahead.
Mm-hmm.
The argument there is that the meeting was unminuted, but it involved a visit to the port, and the suspicion is that it was, and we know that the meeting was at the invitation of the Port of Dover, and the suspicion is that there was inappropriate lobbying going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the accusation. Obviously, Port of Dover deny that, and Marine Management Organisation deny that, but that may yet come to in front of a judge to decide. On the archaeological side, it went to 3 public consultations, which is almost unprecedented. In the first 2 public consultations, one of the documents under consideration was a written scheme of investigation, which is a formal document that is submitted as part of the planning process, designed to show how archaeology will be considered within the licence if it's granted.
Mm-hmm.
The final consultation, however, the MMO refused to publish a written scheme of investigation for the archaeology, claiming that the document was an incomplete draft.
Mm.
Now, the argument there is that, wait a minute, how can you have a consultation on something this far-reaching, because this is an incredibly sensitive archaeological and site, but also for the natural environment too. It's for seabirds and seals and fish and shellfish. So how can you take a decision this far-reaching with incomplete documentation?
Yeah, yeah.
And whether that's appropriate and legally acceptable.
Yeah. Now, bearing in mind that there are 3 stories to talk about in this segment, we should move on.
I mean,
But briefly, it's worthwhile to say it's good to see that this story is now getting, as it were, more and more attention. So, for example, there's a headline here from the BBC saying Goodwin Sands dredging plans disgusting, as people are commenting on this on a more, I don't know,
and it's worth saying the reason,
level.
yeah, and it's worth just saying as a final point, one of the reasons people are saying it's disgusting, in fact, that quote comes from the chair of the Battle of Britain Museum at Hawkinge,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because one of the most contentious areas of this has been the potential to damage or destroy crashed aircraft from World War II in particular, many of which went down in the area of the Goodwin Sands and which are protected by the Protection of Military Remains Act. The government's chosen not to invoke the Protection of Military Remains Act to protect the Goodwin Sands, and again, that's very controversial. This as the saying goes, this one's going to run and run.
But it's absolutely worth covering though, because it has an impact on so many things: development, how we approach military remains, and also actually how we approach the sea and the ocean archaeological landscape as well. So
absolutely, this is a test case, and it's worth saying that the final point is that the Goodwin Sands as a whole, not just the bit that's going to be dredged, but the Goodwin Sands as a whole, has just been named as a one of the government's MCZ's marine conservation zones. So for many people, it's absurd that you say that something is so important that it's given a special status, for a special conservation status, and then you allow 3 million tons of it to be taken away and turned into a car park.
Yeah, so we'll put links to relevant articles below, and also the statement, the decision PDF from the MMO as well.
Which is worth reading.
Yeah. Okay. So number two.
Number two, well, it's two interlinked stories, really. Okay. The first one is a win, really, for archaeology. Actually, these are two wins on point so far for archaeology. The first one is a court case in Florida, in the United States, where the flagship of a French expedition led by a man called Jean Ribault, a ship called La Trinité, was located. She was lost in a hurricane in 1565, and while on the way to supply what was then a new French colony at what's now Jacksonville in Florida. La Trinité was sunk. She was found by a group of treasure hunters. In fact, a commercial company who called Global Marine Exploration. In 2016, they announced they'd found the ship. They identified it using particularly a fleur-de-lis coat of arms that were found on and also bronze cannon found on the wreck site. They initially said that they'd identified them as Ribault's ship or ships, but then they published a report that suggested that the identity of the vessels might not be known. Now, the reason cynics would say that they published material questioning the identity was that this was an official French expedition, and the French government could claim ownership of the wrecks, and because it was in American waters, the American Sunken Military Craft Act applies, which protects the military vessels of any nationality within US jurisdiction. And this went to court, and the court in Florida has upheld the claim of the French. Global Marine Exploration cannot commercially exploit the wreck. So that's in a sense that that's a win for maritime archaeology, because we've talked a lot about treasure hunting companies in the past on Watching Brief. People, most famous one is probably Odyssey Marine Exploration. There are a number of others now who use maritime archaeology as an investment vehicle, effectively. So they get people to invest, banking on the idea that they're going to find this huge haul of gold or wine or something like that in a wreck. Absolutely. But this is a setback for those, because it reinforces the rights, certainly over official military vessels that were sailing under government instructions. It's interesting as well that the lawyer representing the French government was James A. Gould, who represented the Spanish government in the Odyssey case.
Yeah.
When Odyssey lost their claim over the Spanish frigate, the Mercedes.
So he's carving out quite a good niche practice here, isn't he? It's good.
He's a very effective lawyer.
Yeah. And so how does that then relate to Colombia then?
Right. Well, this is the second half of the story, really.
Mm-hmm.
Last time, in fact, in watching Brief, we talked about the Spanish galleon, the San José, which was sunk off Colombian Port of Cartagena in 1708 in action against the Royal Navy. She blew up and sank while allegedly carrying a large cargo of valuables, bullion and jewels. She was part of the Spanish Navy, but she's in Colombian territorial waters, and the Colombian government, the previous Colombian president, had reached an agreement with another commercial company to salvage the wreck and to effectively monetize the valuable she was carrying. And this was pushed through to the extent they actually changed the law in Colombia to allow the sale of archaeological finds, archaeological artifacts.
Yeah.
But largely thanks to a work done in Spain by a Spanish lawyer and also a Spanish news outlet and website called ABC. A journalist working for ABC, Jesus Garcia Calero, has done extensive work publicising, researching and publicising the background to the company that had got the contract.
Yes.
It turns out that the archaeological director, Menson Bound, has been accused of being being involved in the sale of archaeological artifacts before, on at least 2 occasions. He worked for a company called Archaeonautas, which had a commercially exploited wrecks off Mozambique and the Cape Verde Islands.
Verde.
Yeah, Cape Verde Islands.
And is it the San Jose?
It's the San Jose.
Yeah. Sorry, a bit of an in-joke there, sorry.
The archaeological company involved is, most British archaeological companies are registered charities, and they're registered in London, and they have boards of trustees and so on. In this case, the company was and I'm just going to make sure I've got my facts right here. It's Marine Archaeological Consultants is the company. They're actually registered ultimately in the Cayman Islands, and the principal investor is a city fund manager, a man called Ross Hyatt. Basically it's a financial vehicle again.
Yeah. You don't. I've not.
How many archaeological companies have you worked for that registered in the Cayman Islands?
Yeah, none. But also, how many archaeological companies that either of us have worked for have essentially banker financial backing? It's just yeah. So yes, this is absolutely about the aggressive monetization of that. And
effectively, to cut to the chase again, what has happened is that under a lot of pressure, both from the research that ABC have done, showing quite how questionable some of the financial approach to this has been in terms of ethics and archaeological ethics and so on. This has been exposed by ABC and Jesus and his colleagues. The story was picked up by UNESCO, who again brought a lot of pressure on the Colombian government to cancel the contract and to apply the principles of the UNESCO Convention on Underwater Cultural Heritage, which would stop the monetization of the artifacts.
And speaking of UNESCO, just briefly, presumably their previous statement still stands. They're basically still trying to encourage the government not to go down this route.
That's right. The situation we are at now is that the president, the outgoing president, who's about to leave office, who actually
President of Colombia, not UNESCO.
Yes, President of Colombia, President Santos, is about to leave office. It was President Santos who came up with this scheme, but he's now been forced to basically put it on hold.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's not going to go ahead imminently. Part of the contract was that the contract would begin before, while he was still in office.
Right.
That's now not going to happen.
No.
And so it's really back to the negotiating board. Depending on how things turn out, it may well end up perhaps in the courts somewhere or other. Certainly the Spanish government seems to be taking a more active interest in it now. There's a new president coming in, and obviously UNESCO are still putting out a hand and saying, work with us. So how it will turn out, I mean, there are all sorts of other questions. There were questions over the qualifications of the lead Colombian archaeologist, suggestions that person overstated their qualifications and experience.
Mm-hmm.
There were all sorts of other questions over the project. So in a sense, it's a bit like the HMS Victory project, which in certain superficially there's certain similarities, where you've got a commercial company that was with a veneer of archaeology that was trying to commercially exploit a wreck that is now on permanent hold effectively because the government concerned, in the case of Victory, the British government, in the case of San Jose, the Colombian government, they just cannot go ahead now.
No. Okay. Well, again, that's something that we'll keep an eye on and bring it to your attention as and when things change.